was asked to open with a few words about creativity and effectiveness. So I wrote a few words. The artist defines creativity. The audience defines effectiveness. Therefore, to be creative, study art. To be effective, study the audience. To be both, study how the audience responds to the art. I grew up in a very small farming community in northeastern Indiana, a Swiss Mennonite community, in fact. My dad died when I was 3.5 years old, so my mother, 27 years old, was a young working mom. She worked in this tiny little grocery store in town. It was so small that we couldn't accommodate all the posters and the promotional material sent in by companies like Kraft Foods and General Mills and Mars Candies. So we couldn't put them up. There was no space. So I would take them home and study them. I mean, who writes that stuff? And who does those pictures? And who comes up with that copy and the logos? And somewhere out there, somebody does that. So that was an early fascination, which I later discovered was advertising. There were good things about growing up in that little town. I learned from the local merchants, Willie Woolman, who was a perfectionist making those cabinets. He would say in his heavily accented voice, "Boys, be always good. Be always good at what you do. Be always good to your fellow friends, your family. Be always good to God. Be good to yourself. Be always good." So that was a good influence. And then my grandfather, who really sort of turned out to be my surrogate dad. He was a great inspiration to me. He was an auctioneer, the best one in Adams County, Indiana. And he would stand up there and cry the sale, but he would intersperse it with jokes and humor. He was a showman. He taught me that selling stuff can be fun and that showmanship is an important part of salesmanship. So graduated from high school in 1953 with 3 of my buddies and set out for New York City. None of us had ever been to New York. And I'll never forget coming through the Holland Tunnel.
There it is, New York, the Wonder City, a magic city of marvels and superlatives.
Amazing. I have to be here. But I had no contacts. I had a modicum of talent. I had no formal training. I had no connections. I went to phone booths and called McCann Erickson saying, "I'm looking for a job." And the voice said, "As what? Anything." But there was no possibility of getting into the industry. I went back to the Midwest and got a job as an apprentice in a commercial art studio in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Before long, I was able to leave Fort Wayne for Chicago. So I finally got an interview with an agency in Chicago called Needham, Lewis and Brorby. And it was a big agency, well-known agency. And I thought I was an art director because I had been working in art studios. And I showed the guy my book on a Saturday morning and said, "We don't actually have any openings for a beginning art director, but we have an opening for a beginning copywriter." And I said, "I'll take it." I'd never really known about copywriting, but I was going to get a job in an advertising agency. My first assignment is do 26 humorous radio commercials for State Farm Insurance. I said, humor, radio? I'm an art director. What's radio? And humor? I don't know how to write funny. So I go to my supervisor. I said, "Can you give me some tips on writing humor?" He looks over his glass and he said, "You go back and type until you laugh. When you laugh, bring me what made you laugh. If I don't laugh, it's not funny. Go back and type some more." Which is how I got to be a really good typist. But I couldn't make him laugh. And finally, he goes on 2-week summer holiday, and the account guys are getting kind of nervous because we have a deadline. So I showed them my scripts. I made them laugh. And they said, "I think we could take these down to Bloomington, maybe show them to the client." And we made the client laugh. my career took a little better turn starting then.
Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
Sometimes a creative act is inspiration. Sometimes it's the result of frustration, and sometimes it's the result of desperation. And that's the story of McDonald's. A lot of the research said women want to get away from the routine of having to plan a meal every night. And also that kids would like to get away from table manners and vegetables, and dads actually would like to get away from high prices. And I started writing a lyric. For some reason, I decided to write a lyric about cleanliness. And I wrote, grab a bucket and mop, scrub the bottom and top. There is nothing so clean as my burger machine. With a broom and a brush, we're so near yet far away. So get up and get away to McDonald's. We go to McDonald's and they love the sound, they love the feeling. They say, what do they say at the end? We're so near yet far away. I mean, we're close by geographically, but psychologically we're another place, like an island. They said, well, we don't get it. We like the tune, we like the feeling, but so now we're stuck with 8 notes that need words, and we've got a sale. This is where the desperation comes in. So finally, after trying all combinations, once again, I remember typing, you deserve a break today, and then so get up and get away to McDonald's.
You deserve a break today, yeah. So get up and get away to McDonald's.
I think one of my mentors during that time was Paul Harper, who was head of the Needham Lewis and Brorby agency at that time, later changed it to include his name. Paul was an ex-Marine, but he wore the cloak of leadership with such dignity and such humility. And if you looked at what Paul Harper said about advertising and about creativity and about rules and how we need to break them, his first guideline for creativity was break the pattern. I was inspired by a guy who later became my friend, Wynton Marsalis, and how you build teams. And by people I didn't know, musicians, Duke Ellington, who never liked to write an ending to a song. Why is that? He was asked. Because we should always be moving on. We should always be in the state of becoming, he said. I never forgot that. We should always be in the state of becoming, seeing what we can do better, how we can become better ourselves and help other people become better. I was inspired along the way by some of the great clients I got to work with who were leaders. I was inspired by Ed Rust, who was CEO of State Farm. When I started working on those 26 humorous commercials, his father had been head of the company and now he was head of the company. What an ordinary guy, and what common sense. Fred Turner, CEO of McDonald's. Fred started in a McDonald's store and worked his way up. He had this intuitive understanding of what made great advertising. McDonald's in 1975 decided they wanted a special campaign for the Big Mac. And they wanted to tell people what's in a Big Mac, 7 special ingredients. And we had research that said, you probably don't want to tell them what's in a Big Mac because Big Mac has one sort of singular taste.
McDonald's Big Mac, the big sandwich with a great big taste that everybody's talking about.
It's like a mystique. And you don't want to break that down by saying, well, what it really is these 7 ingredients.
Sauce, lettuce, cheese, and the pickles. No.
Pickles, cheese, oh.
We tried to sell them off the idea of explaining the ingredients, and they would have none of it. So we go back to the agency and we say, okay, what is in a Big Mac? Let's just list it. And at some point I said, what if we taught people how to remember the ingredients of a Big Mac the same way we teach our kids how to learn the alphabet, with a dumb, tuneless chant, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And Dan Nichols says, 2 all beef patties with his guitar, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions on a sesame seed bun.
2 all beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions on a sesame seed bun.
Say that again.
2 all beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions on a sesame seed bun.
Hey, that's a
Big Mac.
You deserve a break today at McDonald's.
I so admired what Bill Bernbach and his team were doing in New York, because I was so impressed with the graphic sensitivity and the simplicity. By the time I was made CEO of Needham Harper Worldwide, we were ranked number 16 in the world, and we had a good creative reputation. But it seemed to me, we got to figure out a way to put Needham together with DDB. And so in 1985, plans were afoot to see if we could buy Doyle Dane Bernbach, with the idea of putting those 2 agencies together for a new creative force built on the philosophies of Bill Bernbach. Everything I read, every time I read his ideas, I said, these cannot be improved upon, and they will be eternal. They will never be out of date.
Everybody talks about change all the time. I think advertising, essentially, the persuasion part of advertising, is going to be the same 100 years from now. Because the man with talent will be able to persuade, and the man without talent won't.
And about that time, I started having breakfast with Alan Rosenshine, who was another copywriter turned CEO, heading BBDO at that time. We agreed on so many things about where the business was going. And so this whole thing came together. We said, how about a 3-way? We'll take BBDO, DDB, and Needham, and the criterion for this club is you got to be creative. And so Needham had a very good creative reputation at that time, and of course DDB, the legacy, and BBDO was doing amazing work. So put those 3 together and form a new holding company, and BBDO will remain intact, and you, Keith, will be the head of the new combined agency. But on April 26, 1986, we announced on a Monday morning the 3-way merger, and thus Omnicom Group was born. So the core values of this new creative force were creativity and humanity. But how do you create a culture when you have agencies around the world? You want to create a presence, but you can't physically be in all of those places. So I had the idea that, and this was before email or any electronic communication, I had the idea that if I penned something, if I wrote a 1-pager in the middle of the week, when people would want a word of encouragement, perhaps, maybe a note of optimism, maybe a little borrowed wisdom, or maybe even some original wisdom if I could find some. And many of them were place-specific, client-specific, person-specific. But a couple years ago, somebody said, a lot of them are timeless, so why don't you collect some and put them in a book? So I did. So there are 104. That's 2 years worth of Wednesdays in this book. And I don't know if you can see it, it's called A Loopy Vision. The text goes like this: when people are feeling down or discouraged after a business or personal setback, I sometimes share a loopy vision of life I've used to convince myself that a better day is coming. In fact, I've used this scribble to diagram everything from the history of our company to the cycles of a day, a week, or a lifetime. It's an optimistic, if simplistic, view of life based on a belief that history is an ever-rising roller coaster, and that down cycles can create the resolve needed to rise even higher. Going down can be scary, but without the force created by a fall, there would be no exhilarating rise. Sometimes it's inspiring to have an enemy to keep in mind. Picasso said you should always be painting against something. And about sophomore in high school, the publisher of the local paper decided he wanted a new corporate identity, new letterheads. And he had heard that I had an interest in advertising and commercial art, so he asked me if I would like to take a crack at designing his new letterhead, which of course I jumped at the chance. And did I work hard on. I came up with 3 different designs that I thought were worthy of presenting to Wifty Sprunger. the big deal in my hometown. So I enter his office and Wifty's sitting behind his nifty Wifty desk, and I show these to him and he looks at them and says, I think I prefer this one. It's good. I like it. My first satisfied client. I'm over the moon. I send Wifty a bill for $15 and he goes ballistic. What? You're gonna charge me for this? I give you a chance to actually get something published and you're gonna charge me $15? I don't think it's worth $15. And I, by the way, don't think you have what it takes to be a success in advertising or commercial art. And I never forgot him. Wifty, a great inspiration, maybe one of the greatest. At one point, this was by the time I had become head of the agency, I asked the leaders of all 200 DDB offices around the world to give me the names of 3 leaders, living or dead, known or well-known, that had inspired them, because I wanted to see what kind of leadership they were looking for. At the top, the most named was Gandhi, and number 2 was Mandela, and number 3 was Churchill. These were people who led by example, who led by inspiring people to do their best. To be a leader, you have to have followers. And the fact that you have a title, the fact that you're the boss, does not make you a leader. You get to be a leader if you can articulate a vision that excites people, that they want to embrace, and they believe that by following you, they're going to be better themselves, and they're going to fulfill their own ambitions and realize their own dreams, and they're going to have more fun doing it. I never really set out to be a leader. I wanted to be a creative guy in an advertising agency. But as I went from copywriter to copy supervisor, pretty soon I had a group. I found it interesting to think about how you could, instead of doing the ad, how you could inspire somebody else to do something. And I found it was very gratifying to think about creating a culture, creating a team, creating a group that you could inspire to do great work. My mantra, my leadership mantra was Lao Tzu, who 500 BC said, the leader when successful will be largely invisible because the people will remark, we did it ourselves. Creative achievement has 3 ingredients in my experience. One is talent, which God gives you, and you either get a lot or a little, something in between. There's nothing you can do about the size of the talent, of the gift. Second is skill, and that you can do something about. You can learn, you can practice and practice and practice. I mean, the best way to create a habit is just keep doing it and keep doing it. So that you can do. But the third is passion, and I think I've seen where passion and the persistence to follow that passion can overcome a shortcoming in the first 2. In order to be in advertising and a success, you have to be comfortable with rejection. You have to be comfortable with ambiguity. You have to have this passion and persistence to carry on. You also have to have this curiosity to learn everything you can about everything you can. Read, learn from art, learn from music, find out everything you can about everything. Be curious. Einstein said, I want to figure out how the universe works. That should be your quest. People ask me, if there hadn't been anything like advertising, what would you have done? And I say, well, I probably would have invented advertising. Where else can you, in one chosen profession, can you work with every day with new concepts, new ideas, new combinations of words and pictures and notions, and can do this while studying anthropology, psychology, and then in combination with the disciplines of commerce and business and science, and do all of this in one place. I just can't imagine.
Grab a bucket and mop. Scrub the bottom and top. There is nothing so clean
That's my burger machine with a broom and a brush. Clean it up for the rush. Before you open the door, or to shine on the floor. When we finish one dance, start all over again. Tell me, what does it mean? At McDonald's it's clean. You deserve a break today. So get up and get away to McDonald's.